Generic greeting intro, folks. Sugar Pants here, and if there's one thing I love, it's shitty movies. But if there's two things I love, it's shitty movies and video games. And if you put the two together, then I'm one happy little harlequin. And that's what I've dredged up from the dungeon today, 1983's Joysticks. This movie is actually just one of the billion or so movies made in the 80s where a group of misfits are in danger of losing their favorite hangout. But instead of a ski lodge or a frat house, this movie takes place in an arcade. Truly groundbreaking stuff, Hollywood. So is this one worthy of our hard-earned quarters? Let's get to the sleaze docket and see what's in store for us before the kill screen. We have 0 dead bodies, 22 naked breasts, a new single movie record for the show. 0 cups blood, 11 Pac-Man wipe transitions, 1 really disgusting t-shirt, 1 hot dog in the cleavage, 1 pair of Pac-Man earrings, 1 pair of Pac-Man panties, public domain singing, annoying punkery, gratuitous valley girling, joystick masturbatory symbolism, strip video gaming, fourth wall breakage, arcade button tonguing, and way too many hot chicks hanging out with greasy arcade nerds. Our movie begins with some hot arcade action and a really lame song equating gaming and masturbation.
Playing with my joystick. Wiggle left, jerk it right.
Joe Don Baker?
You guys watch Joe Don Baker movies?
Oh, look, just get back to work, temp boy.
So the whole sequence is a shitty player playing terribly and shaking her ass around for the camera. Just in case you were curious what the tone of the movie was going to be. With that out of the way, we meet one of our misfit teens heading to work and singing some lovely public domain songs that we don't have to pay for. This is Eugene, because of course it is. He's heading to the arcade for his first day of work. Before he can get there, a convertible with 2 hotties pulls up and invite him to join them in their car by flashing their tatas. Honestly, I think this might be a record for the show. Naked boobs literally 3 minutes and 4 seconds in. Eugene doesn't need much more encouragement and climbs into their car. Turns out the girls are doing a stunt to get into a sorority. They don't have to have sex with him, just get him out of his pants for a photo. The girls snap a pic right as a cop drives by. Eugene panics and goes back to his car, and the girls drive off with his pants to the arcade. Here we meet the arcade operator, Jeff. Turns out his grandpa actually owns the place and is leaving him in charge while he's away. A couple of Valley girls show up and invite Jeff to play a game with them, and he tells them he never plays the games. Seems odd, but I guess you don't have to eat cheeseburgers to work at Burger King. Eugene finally makes it to work and reclaims his pants while the girls paw him some more. We then get a nice little montage of Eugene running into the weirdo gamers. And who hasn't been to the arcade and run into the repressed friar or the curly Joe? Finally, he comes across the gigantic ball of grease called Dorfus. Get used to that nasty shirt because you'll be seeing it for the rest of the movie. Dorfus is completely glued to his game of Pac-Man, trying to set a 7-figure score because he's never seen that before. Fun fact, a perfect game of Pac-Man is 3,333,360 points, and the current record holder is David Race, who did it in 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 49 seconds. Being interrupted, Dorfus loses his last life and pulls a switchblade on Eugene. But he's not a violent guy, he just goes behind the cabinet to crack open the machine to take a look. Back at the snack bar, Eugene accidentally flings his hot dog into this girl's cleavage. I gotta say, she's taking it pretty well. And that's when the punk crowd shows up. Or whatever the writers imagine punks to be. King Vidiot, his actual character name, rolls up with his girls and out-nerd the nerds.
Start game!
Damn, this arcade's the hottest spot in town. Everyone's showing up. Here comes Captain Buzzkill to find his daughter embroiled in a geek pile. Mr. Rudder goes all Karen and demands to see the manager and is not thrilled to see that it's Jeff. But before he can cause any more ruckus, Dorfus blasts a gigantic fart and chases them off. Apparently Mr. Rudder is not happy that Patsy is hanging out at the arcade, and that's literally the whole movie's conflict, folks. Next day, Eugene is given the project of getting to the bottom of the weird shaking van in the parking lot. Ignoring the moans, he climbs up to the top to look through the van's sunroof and finds a couple screwing in the hot tub in the back. Jesus, does any woman have any natural reactions in this movie? Back inside, Jeff is asking the girls to show him the pic they took of Eugene, but they refuse. That is, until he offers to show them the brand new game he's got in the back over a round of strip video. And what game are they going to play? Streaking! Seriously, I really had to do some digging to get that one. We then get another montage of skin and a reminder that Jeff doesn't play the games. Seems odd that we've gotten 2 mentions of this in the first 20 minutes. I'm sure it won't come into play later on, right? So without any exposition, we just get video of the topless girls bouncing around. And I'm okay with that. Eventually, the video game foreplay reaches its peak, and the 2 girls throw Jeff to the bed. Meanwhile, Eugene and Dorfus are skulking around on the roof with a fire extinguisher. Blasting it into the vents, the girls make a break for it, wearing only their panties. Unfortunately, they crash right into Mr. Rudder, who is now even more determined to shut the place down. His 2 nephews, Max and Arnie, ask what he wants them to do, and he says nothing. So they take that as the initiative to do something. They get dressed in some ridiculous costumes for some reason, which leads to the outdated gag of straight guy falls for the dude in a dress. Finally, Arnie gets the great idea to sneak in after hours and steal all the machines, but Eugene hears the plan. He tells Jeff and says to call the police, but Jeff says he's got a better idea. Cut to Eugene and Dorfus driving to someone's house in the middle of the night. They climb up to the 2nd-story window and go inside. They're making a lot of noise, but fortunately the woman inside is out cold due to sleeping pills. Dorfus says it's Eugene's opportunity to lose his virginity. Jesus, Dorfus, sex with an unconscious woman? Why don't you go have a Jell-O pudding pop and think that one through? But the woman is subconsciously still horny and grabs Eugene and rolls around with him for a while, refusing to let him go. Back at the arcade, Max and Arnie arrive with a moving van and crack open the loading doors. They start unloading the arcade cabinets as Jeff and his crew drain the gas tank. Dorfus looks outside the bedroom door and sees Mr. Rudder heading their way and hides in the closet. For some reason, he doesn't notice his wife rolling around in bed with a teenager. Seeing his chance, Dorfus heads for the door and accidentally shits his pants.
Oh, damn it, Vivian. I tell you to talk to Dr. Michelson about that.
He runs downstairs and rings the doorbell, and Mr. Rudder heads downstairs. Angrily, he opens the door, and Dorfus does his best to give Eugene a chance to escape. Unfortunately, Eugene is still entangled in Mrs. Rudder's vice-like grip. Max and Arnie go to leave, but can't get the truck started. After a long back and forth, they decide to both go for gas. That's when Jeff and his crew take back all the machines. Eugene finally gets away, but the ladder has fallen, so he heads out the door and runs right into Patsy, and she isn't very thrilled at the idea that Eugene is potentially nailing her mom. Who could blame her? With the heist foiled, Jeff tells his crew that when they get the arcade set back up, he's throwing a pajama party to thank them all. Eugene finally gets out and climbs down right in front of Mr. Rudder, but before he can react, his nephews show up with their van. They say he'll be so proud of what they did, but open a completely empty van, and Patsy, for some reason, goes off with the other 2. And it's just now occurring to me, at no point did we find out what the fuck Eugene and Dorfus were even doing at Mr. Rudder's house. You know, it's funny, he's throwing a pajama party, but all the guys are still in their regular street clothes. It's almost like this movie isn't trying to be anything other than an excuse to get girls undressed. King Vidiot sees some activity at the arcade, because he obviously doesn't go anywhere else in town, and crashes the party. Jeff tells him it's invite only, but Vidiot challenges him to a contest. Jeff again reminds us he doesn't play the game, so Vidiot says to pick his best gamer. If Vidiot wins, they get to stay. So Jeff picks Dorfus, and they play
Satan's Hollow!
Fun fact, director Graydon Clark approached Midway to ask if they could use Pac-Man throughout the film, and they agreed as long as they were allowed to feature a game that hadn't been released yet, and they chose Satan's Hollow. Which makes me wonder if this whole challenge sequence even existed before that condition was requested, or if it was written in to accommodate the request. Anyway, the crowd gathers in front of this towering arcade machine, complete with custom player names and gigantic joysticks. King Vidiot immediately starts racking up the points, while Dorfus eats. Eventually, Dorfus starts playing once he's down to his final life and goes on to win the game. Unfortunately, the movie basically never really shows us the score, so the stakes are non-existent. We only know he won because they tell us he won. But even when he wins, Dorfus just keeps going. Eugene gives a heartfelt speech about how games are a way of life for the guy, and Dorfus says it made him sick to his stomach. Jeff goes to console King Vidiot and invite him to go ahead and stick around as long as he doesn't cause any trouble. But he refuses the invite and angrily storms off. Mr. Rudder shows up to take Patsy home again and tells Jeff he has no right to be open so late. Jeff informs him he has every right to host a private party and throws him out. Rudder instructs his nephews to start a spontaneous protest outside of the arcade. Next morning, the news is on the scene and interviews Mr. Rudder, who takes the concerned parent angle.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
After wrapping up the interview, Jeff calls the reporter over and we immediately jump to a follow-up at Mr. Rudder's house. During this segment, Rudder says he will continue to spearhead the protest until the mayor calls a council meeting to discuss the arcade. The reporter then says she has been informed of a photograph of Mr. Rudder at the arcade with two semi-nude girls in his arms. Mr. Rudder denies the existence of the photograph and ends the interview. After closing, Jeff is sitting at a snack bar, pining over a photograph of some unknown girl. Really? Plot and or character development? We're already halfway through this one. Why start now? Mr. Rudder and his nephews meet with Jeff and hash out some conditions. Rudder demands that Jeff turn over the photographs and tell the reporter that it was a fake. Jeff demands Rudder sign an agreement that he stops the protest and leaves the arcade alone. Rudder says his word should be good enough, but Jeff doesn't agree. The nephews snatch the envelope and the three storm off. The next day, Eugene attempts to put a stop to the protest by offering a free token in exchange for their picket signs, which is a really smart move, as it removes their presence outside and gives the protesters a chance to see the arcade in action for themselves. King Vidiot isn't happy to see all these old people using the machines. See folks, video game gatekeepers have always been a pain in the ass. It's not a recent development. He storms off, but Rudder is shortly behind to set up a meeting. Rudder tries to convince Vidiot to help him shut down the arcade, but Vidiot says he loves the arcade too much. So Rudder agrees to buy Vidiot his own private arcade machine. Vidiot gets all excited, but demands some wheels for him and his crew. And in this movie, that means ridiculous pocket bikes. With their down payment, the Vidiot crew shows up to cause a ruckus. Suddenly the media is on the scene to see the troublemakers arrested. It seriously must be a slow-ass news week. But Rudder's efforts are enough for the mayor to call a city council meeting about the arcade's future. The meeting begins with Mr. Rudder's speech about how the arcade is the center for all the town's problems. And it's just amazing that this bullshit of blaming all of our problems on video games has literally been happening for over 40 years at this point, because they're still trotting that classic fear-mongering out today. Jeff stands up to make his opening remarks, which literally is just that Rudder is, and I quote, full of shit. Rudder brings up a medical expert on the warning signs of frequent video game playing, and the whole thing is just a chance for masturbation jokes. His next witness is a coach who swears video games are more addictive than drugs, alcohol, or women. Then King Vidiot takes to the stage to show the crowd that video games are why he is how he is. Finally, Rudder gives his description of the arcade, which gives us this fantasy sequence of leather S&M, mud wrestling, and prostitution. And I gotta say, if this is how the conservatives see the world, it's no wonder so many are caught in sex scandals. Finally, Jeff gets his turn at the stage, and his portrayal is as much bullshit as Rudder's, but in the opposite direction. Well-behaved youngsters drinking milk and saying their prayers. He calls Patsy to the stand, who says the youth all need a place to go for some good, clean fun. This sends her dad into a rage-filled screaming session. Jeff then shows everyone exactly what Rudder means by immoral slime and shows the photograph. Rudder opens the envelope he thought had the photograph, only to see a pantsless Eugene. Jeff concludes by saying that the kids who meet at the arcade feel like it's a place where they belong. The mayor finally closes the meeting by saying that there has been no proof of broken laws, and until they get such proof, there's nothing they can do. Rudder then shows Jeff the rat his nephews found in the kitchen as proof he'll be using for the next round. Eugene steps up to suggest a winner-take-all game challenge between King Vidiot and Dorfus. Personally, I'd just call Rudder's bluff and invite my own health inspector for an independent voluntary assessment. Then I'd see about suing Rudder's ass for harassment. But that doesn't make for an exciting conclusion to a movie, so challenge at the arcade it is. Rudder and Vidiot are ready for the face-off, but Dorfus is nowhere to be seen. But even though Jeff has adamantly stated he doesn't play games, he has no choice but to play in Dorfus's place. Unfortunately, that wasn't the deal, so Rudder ups the ante. He says that he'll allow Jeff to play, but if he loses, he not only has to shut down the arcade, but he can't open up another one later on. Jeff agrees on the condition that he gets 15 minutes to get ready, and that's when we finally find out why Jeff doesn't play games. They make him physically ill because they remind him of his ex-girlfriend. Apparently, she and Jeff used to screw around in the back room after closing time until one night when her father busts in and slaps the hell out of her. They moved out of town and Jeff stopped playing games because just looking at them reminds him of that horrible night. So Eugene helps Jeff train and prepare for the games by reading strategy and tips while he does push-ups. He also plays streaking because I guess it's close enough to Pac-Man to count. Eventually he's ready to go to the challenge and the game is Super Pac-Man. But shortly into the match, Jeff starts having naked girl flashbacks and tells Eugene to find Dorfus. And where is he? Tied up on Rudder's couch with the nephews watching. The two agree that Dorfus isn't going anywhere, so they go to the arcade to see if everything's okay. Unable to speak, Dorfus farts for help and wakes up Mrs. Rudder, who immediately climbs on top of the sweaty heap that, in all honesty, must smell really awful at this point in the movie. Back at the arcade, we have to freeze frame the games to see the score, 82,250 to 150. Honestly, Jeff isn't doing very well at all. Unfortunately, the mayor shows up to take a look around for himself, which stops Eugene from leaving to go find Dorfus. Eugene offers him some complimentary tokens to try the games, and it doesn't take long before the mayor is having the time of his life. Dorfus asks Mrs. Rudder to untie him, and she breaks the fourth wall. He promises to come back with other boys, and she gets all gooey at that idea. King Vidiot seems pretty bored by this one-sided victory, and we get a minor glimpse at the score, 143,000 versus 410. Seriously, I think the game running without anyone at the controls might do better. Mr. Rudder steps up to see if Jeff has had enough. Meanwhile, King Vidiot keeps piling on the score. Rudder says Vidiot might as well put it to bed, slaps his hand, and Vidiot walks away. His last life is taken just as Dorfus announces his arrival with another loud fart. Eugene stops him before he can take over the game, saying that Jeff needs to face his fears, and they agree it's better to let him finish the match on his own. Dorfus agrees, and now with his friends supporting him, Jeff starts racking up the points. Unfortunately, we never saw King Vidiot's final score, so there's absolutely no tension or build-up to see where Jeff needs to be to win. At one point, we see Jeff has 214,000 points, but keeps going. Rudder finds the mayor and demands he shut the place down once and for all, but the mayor tells him,
I'll blow it out your ass, brother.
Jeff then finishes his current level, which is apparently all the points he needs to win. No final score shot is given. During the celebration, Jeff's grandpa shows up to say why he's been gone. He's been looking for Jeff's old girlfriend and reunites the two. Then immediately says how to help out Eugene.
Somebody gotta get this boy laid.
So Jeff and Dorfus set Eugene up with Mrs. Rudder, and we roll the credits. Kind of a dime a dozen sort of movie the 80s gave to the world. Nerds and outcasts hooking up with women way outside of their levels, and the poor women who have to rub up against these slobs. It set some really unrealistic ideas for my young little mind about what to expect from life. But that's entertainment for ya. Graydon Clark directed this tissue-thin movie, and you might recognize some of his other films. Without Warning, The Return, Uninvited, and Star Games. For all you Misties out there, we also have Final Justice, so go ahead on. It's your move. Joe Don Baker gets top billing in this one, and he is definitely a favorite face in the world of bad movies. Some of his more notable credits include Walking Tall, Mitchell, Final Justice, The Living Daylights, Cape Fear, Goldeneye, Mars Attacks, Tomorrow Never Dies, Joe Dirt, and The Dukes of Hazzard. Our punk reject King Vidiot was played by John Grease, but I'm willing to bet most people know him as Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. He's also been in Real Genius, Terror Vision, The Monster Squad, Fright Night Part 2, Men in Black, and he was one of the soldiers in the music video for Alice in Chains' Rooster. And in an odd little twist, Mrs. Rudder, who spent the entire movie grinding on teenagers, is someone you might know but probably never actually seen. She is none other than the Baroness herself, Morgan Lofting.
I arranged it all. I led the Joe agent here knowing this would be the result.
Baroness! But why?
Why? To make you pay for your unfaithfulness with that which you value most. Your ancestral home.
Honest to God, one of my first cartoon crushes in my young days. So with that feculent feature filed away, I'm going back to some classic video games myself. So until I greet you next time, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
If you'll untie me, we can prepare for a marathon experience, unlike anything you've had before.
This is unlike anything I've had before.